Welcome back to Balanced, a podcast of simple discussions about complex topics. I'm Ben.
And I'm Steve.
And this week we are talking about transgender and girls in women's sports.
All right. So we just what's your initial take on it?
So this topic, I don't really know a lot about. I don't watch a lot of sports and I haven't followed. I know there's been cases of athletes who were born male, transition to female, and they're competing against other females. And it is, I guess there's a school of thought that that's unfair because they have certain advantages having been born a male. But I'm interested to get into it with you and hopefully learn some stuff.
Yeah. So I mean, my initial thoughts on this immediately go to no way it should happen. And it's because of my involvement I've had in my life in wrestling and as a wrestling coach. More recently, in recent times, there have been women involved in wrestling in high school currently, like the public high school system where I am at in Maryland. It's a co-ed sport. Girls are allowed to wrestle, and there's no guarantee that a girl's wrestling another girl. Some teams don't have any girl wrestlers. So I have seen many matchups, not many, but probably 70 over my years, because there's not that many girls generally who wrestle. Matches between men or well, sometimes men, but high school boys and high school girls, the same weight, because they have to have weight classes in wrestling. And it's like hands down, with few exceptions, the boys just destroy them. And you might say, well, we're talking about someone who's transitioning, but someone can transition and be in that still state. They have, bigger muscle mass. They have more dense bones, bigger hands, generally bigger feet. And there's a lot of different things about having the denser muscles and everything that goes along with your ligaments, your tendons, the fascia in your body. Everything is different. And
once you get to puberty, that stuff kind of starts to really kind of cement itself. Like, so even if you transition later, a lot of those, like the structural components that make a man, and that would be advantageous in especially a competition of strength like wrestling. Yeah, I could see how that would be. But a question about that. So I didn't know that when there were girls wrestling on high school wrestling teams. That is very interesting. And what I'm curious about that, where my mind kind of goes, is like I'm thinking about just the nature of wrestling itself. I mean, you have two people with a minimal amount of clothing on rolling around.
Yes. Well, I can say this: when I was coaching years ago, when my sons were young, they're both in college now, but youth recreational league, they have like the soccer, they have the flag football, then they had wrestling, and I was a coach on that. And that was something that you had to watch, because once you had a kid who's like 12, a boy, and there's a girl who's like 10 or 11, and this guy's you have to have a partner to go practice moves and stuff, and this person is gravitating towards this person, like you start thinking like, yeah, this is a problem. We got to stop this, right? So it's uncomfortable as a coach. I have known some females who are very good wrestlers. Like there's a one who was on our team, our high school team, and she actually was a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world champion in females for her age group.
Wow.
During high school.
So a very seasoned competitor.
She could get in there and beat half of the boys. Half.
Just because she was so technically proficient.
Yes. So talking about this, and I am sort of into sports, I pulled out some examples that I think make sense to bring up in this context. Like, first one, 2019, Andrea Yearwood, a student athlete transitioning from male to female, finished second in the 55-meter dash, Connecticut Girls Indoor Open Track Championships. Second place, but this is a male transitioning. Well, who placed first? Another male transitioning, Terry Miller, right? And in placing first in that race, that 55-meter dash, Miller set the girls' state indoor record to win finishing in 6.95 seconds. So just really fast. So now this is an example. So I ask myself, this is two people, both of them first and second place, transitioning males. It's like, oh, you're just taking over the sport. Now, both of these people, if you look into it, were track athletes prior as males, and were not high placers, mediocre. Let me give you another one. Fallon Fox, a transgender MMA fighter competing in the women's division. This is a male who transitioned to female. Competing in the women's division at the Capital City Cage Wars, broke her opponent's orbital bone in her skull, gave her a concussion and a head laceration that required 7 staples in less than 2 minutes.
And that's mixed martial arts. I actually saw an interview with her where she was being interviewed, and I don't know if this was when the interview took place, but she was saying that she is actually the one at a disadvantage because she has less testosterone due to the hormone therapy and the transition than a non-transitioning female would have. And I was just kind of scrolling through the comments, and the comments were, one that kind of stuck out to me was like, wow, this dude is beating up girls and still finds a way to make himself the victim. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting barometer of like how some people look at this. I mean, obviously that's a dominant performance, and you hear about those kind of injuries, which I don't think are that common in MMA. That reads like an assault more than a sporting competition.
Yeah, I agree. And it's just huge. And I'll bring up a little bit about, and you should take time to look up Joe Rogan talking on this on his podcast. It's hilarious. And Joe Rogan is an accomplished martial artist. I know he's a little out there sometimes, but he is an athlete and a very accomplished jiu-jitsu practitioner as well. And he had a lot of thoughts on it that I wouldn't have said them as spicily as he had, but I'm like straight on with him on what his thoughts were. So another example. October 2021, much more recent, right? Transgender Laurel Hubbard was named New Zealand Sportswoman of the Year. Sportswoman of the Year in all of New Zealand by the University of Otago after her Olympic debut in the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, where she failed to medal.
Was this weightlifting?
Yes. Sportswoman of the Year. We have no woman that didn't transition, another hardworking woman who made it to some sport and did something great. This is what we're focusing on. To me, that doesn't make sense.
Well, it sounds like, just from the little I know about this, which you just explained, that this person's from New Zealand, I take it.
Yes. Went
to the Olympics, failed to medal. I feel like that person received Sportswoman of the Year because it has a human interest component or a PR component that is
first transgender, and the New Zealand Olympic Committee was like, yep, we're letting it happen. And then the overall arching Olympic Committee like looked at it and went through, and she's in.
So let me ask you this: do you think that Laurel Hubbard, you're not suggesting that this person transitioned to dominate in the sport?
No,
you're saying that like they're transitioning, they happen to be an athlete.
I don't know if they're an athlete or not, but I'm just saying it seems an awful lot like, people are going to hate me for this, but that's fine. A person transitions in that community. Women are starting to get into this. Fox Fallon's already knocked the crap out of someone, right? And these high school boys are beating the crap out of girls and winning all the state championships in Connecticut in sprinting, right? And someone in that community is like, hey, you're pretty big. You throw some weights around, you could probably go to the Olympics in this sport.
Yes, but I feel like
I'm just saying it's a possibility.
Yeah, but I was just going to counter with, I think there probably needs to be some pre-existing gender identity issues there, because I don't think
they did it for that purpose, but someone transitioned and then they're there and someone's like, it's like, you get a kid walk into junior high and he's 6'8", and he's just a kid who likes to play video games and sit at home. And the coach comes up to him and says, hey, you'd probably be pretty good at basketball.
Yeah.
Why don't you come off our team? I'll teach you a few things and you're going to be good at it. Right. Because of your size. So I don't know. That's just my opinion of the possibility there. So moving on, even more recent than that, December 3rd, 2021. So this is a little over a month ago. Yeah. University of Pennsylvania transgender swimmer Leah Thomas won 3 events, setting 3 records and 2 new women's Ivy League records. The reason this came into the news was because a group of, about 10 or 11 parents wrote a group letter to the NCAA and said, hey, listen, this person came in, and here's the idea, Ben. My daughter's been swimming since she was 5. She's competitive. She's worked out. If you know anything about people who really get into swimming too, they're up in the morning at the pool before school.
Yeah. It's a whole lifestyle.
It's a whole lifestyle. They do it. They get to this level. They can get into this great school in the Ivy League. They've got great grades. They've got a great opportunity. They're maybe looking forward to going to the national championships, to whatever it is, right? This guy who is a star male swimmer in high school gets into college, says, I'm transitioning. And NCAA is like, well, I mean, we got to be nice and inclusive. In the name of inclusivity, lets him in. And he's crushing people by 20 seconds.
Yeah, I totally get how, like, if you're on the University of Pennsylvania girls swim team and then you get beat by this person, that would leave a horrible taste in
and think about the same with the sprinters in Connecticut.
Yeah.
And it goes on. So to me, it's a bigger issue than should we be inclusive and let these people in because they feel like it, because they want to do it, or should we really think of a solution that makes sense? Because there's a lot of people that are being negatively affected by this, right? So So my question is, this excluding female athletes from opportunities? I think I would say, if I could go first here to answer that to myself, I think it's excluding female athletes from opportunities. I don't think it's fair.
Well, I think that's a great way to phrase up the question. To ask if this is actually inclusive, or is it in reality exclusive to female athletes? And, to my mind, I don't know what the answer is. Maybe we can get a little bit closer to it as the discussion continues, because it seems like on one hand, it doesn't seem feasible to tell, transgender folks that they can't compete. I mean, some of these people are athletes, but at the same time, it really, based on what little I know about it and some of the examples you just shared, it really doesn't seem fair, especially when you see where they're crushing the records. I mean, that to me is especially indicative of how unfair it is. They're not just doing well, they're doing the best that's ever been done.
Exactly. That Connecticut example, and then that University of Pennsylvania example, both setting records, right? Setting records. It's exclusion in the name of inclusion. So I came up with an idea. I was driving home and I was thinking about this topic and thinking about this discussion we were going to have on it. I came up with like what I thought would be my sort of argument for people who are for this. So I'm going to go through this if you don't mind.
I'm looking forward to hearing it.
Okay, so I call it the allegory of the bike. I really love watching bike racing, like the Tour de France. Now, I think I could win the Tour de France if I enter. I know I'm 53, Ben, but I think I could do it, right?
What's your bike racing experience?
I don't really have that much besides growing up, but I have a friend who has a Ninja motorcycle. And so, like, hold on, wait. But before, we're all similar here. Before you go further to say this, I feel like it's a bike, and I'm going to explain why. It's got 2 wheels. It's got brakes. It's got handlebars. It has a frame. It has rubber tires with air in them. You have to have balance to handle it. I mean, it's got places where you put your feet. It's got a seat. It's a bike. I mean, it's just a little different. It's a little different.
For any listeners who aren't maybe familiar, Steve's describing bicycle race like the Tour de France and a motorcycle that he referenced. So I'm following. I just want to make sure that people listening are getting that.
So I feel like this is a bike though, because it's so similar, right? Yes, it's a little different because there's an engine, but I'm going to put low test gasoline in it. I'm not going to use the high octane stuff. I'm going to put low. So it's going to be a little bit less, right? And I'll even, I'm going to eat a little differently than what they usually do. Like I'm still going to eat cheeseburgers and stuff. So physically at a disadvantage, I'll be to the riders too, probably because they're very healthy and they've got their own chefs and everything that travel along with the teams. But I mean, so there's some different things that are actually keeping me back from doing my best in this. like my cheeseburger diet and my low test gasoline. But I mean, two wheels, handlebar, I got to still make all the miles just like they do. And I feel like it's a bike. And if you think about it, it is part of bicycle, motorcycle. It's a bike. It's a kind of bike. So it's basically the same. So I should be allowed, because otherwise you're excluding me. I should be allowed to do the Tour de France. And I know Tour de France is a team sport, so I've got several friends with motorcycles as well who are doing it with me. So we'll have the same size team, everything. You good with that?
I'm afraid. I mean,
that's fair. That's fair.
I'm kind of enjoying the mental picture of the Kawasaki Ninja floating through the field at the Tour de France, especially on the uphill segments.
But you know what? Here's your argument. Hey, listen, we're human beings. This is the transgender or the transitioning person. I'm a human being. I've got 2 arms, 2 legs. I've got a heart, lungs. We're basically the same. It's just the gender part of that's it. And that's changing. And I'm even going to try to take steps to lower my already way elevated compared to these women, my testosterone level. I'm going to take steps to do that. Take the swimmer though, the male swimmer, bigger hands, right? Than females for pulling water through.
Very important. Hand bigger, and feet size.
Bigger feet, all that sort of stuff, right? So, but we're the same though, right? That's the argument. We're the same. I'm the same. And so if they should be allowed to do that in Connecticut and in MMA and in University of Pennsylvania swimming and in the Olympics, then what's the difference for me on a motorcycle?
On its face, the argument does seem fairly obvious. Like I was saying before, when you have cases where these transitioned athletes are coming in and totally dominating, breaking records and winning this stuff, I wonder what the governing bodies, how do they defend this? Do you know?
Yeah, there's some information about, like, the Olympics has standards on how long you had to be under hormone therapy and things of that nature. But if you read the letter that the parents wrote to the NCAA about the swimmers, not only, Ben, are those females being excluded from chances for athletic success, they're being bullied. If you complain about this, you're a terrible person, you're not inclusive, and so they can't speak up. That's why the parents wrote the letter. Because they all think it, but they're like, well, we can't say anything. Well,
I guess also, especially this student athletes, especially if you're under a scholarship, you risk a lot.
Ethical standards, and you can't go around saying terrible things. People get fired. NFL coach got fired this year for having, language talking about women in a sort of negative way, right? Mm-hmm. And using some racial slurs on an email.
Well, racial slurs in an email that go public, that I get how that could cascade.
But at the same time, think of this, and I'm not saying he shouldn't have been. It's their business decision. Think about on what it's Ivy League schools. My sister went to an Ivy League school. It is very, very liberal, left-leaning.
Yep, sure.
Everybody from the professors, the administration, everybody, and that's the culture. And then someone comes out and says, "We need to get the damn transgender off the girls' team." People are like, "What? Did you just say that?"
Yeah, so it's probably an example of one area of society where the leftist ideals have swung too far to the left.
If there isn't a clear advantage for these transitioning males in girls and women's sports, like the people like Fox Fallon's thinking, like, I'm still disadvantaged, right? If there isn't a clear advantage for them, how come we don't hear complaints about females transitioning to males playing in boys and men's sports? It's because a female transitioning doesn't have any of that pre-packaged, it's almost like that starting state. They don't have it. And I researched, Ben, the most of my research that I did was searching. I looked and I tried hard for longer than anything else I did in this research to find a complaint or even someone mentioning a female transitioning to male going into sports. There is 0 stories about it. There wasn't even any jokes about it.
You do not see females transitioning, going into boy sports and dominating.
Yeah, and here's the thing. It's because they're not dominating and they're not making a big, deep splash and setting records. Why? Because what they were born with is less. in terms of those physical attributes needed, like to, let's say, play lacrosse, or or they're not as tall to play basketball in general. So you just are not seeing it.
I think the physiological differences between the genders are probably at the center of this topic, because obviously it goes much deeper than you and I can speak to. But I know, like, you've mentioned some great points about men in general have different bone structure, different muscle masses. And it's not just the physical differences, but the way the male body uses energy, stores energy, releases energy. That's another factor. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it.
There was a study published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine. It showed that transgender women maintain an athletic advantage over men even after a year of hormone therapy. And they just did the study for a year. They might find that they maintain the advantage for more than a year. Mm-hmm. For 10 years. They mm-hmm. might find it never goes away.
I think if anybody digs into and researches some of these cases and looks at the performance metrics and, like you said, compares males who have transitioned to female playing on girls' teams versus girls who have transitioned to male playing on boys' teams, it's really, really difficult to make a case that this is fair to the other athletes and fair to the spirit of competition overall.
So why would the MMA, the NCAA, if this is so clear, and you and I can sort of say, are we just letting this happen then for the sheer fact that we can say we're being inclusive and not leaving people out?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's probably that, coupled with the fact that we're living in a cancel culture.
So that's sort of what we're saying. Like, it's just out there in common sense terms. It seems unfair, and people are still letting it happen because you're the bad guy if you say something negative towards any group.
I don't want anyone to construe this discussion as being anti-trans when it's really about sports and sports performance and the differences between men and women and how that factors in to these contests. Because, like I said before, we are living in a cancel culture, and I just wanted to make that clear.
I hear you, and it's interesting that you even feel the need to make that clear, because there'll be someone, if someone would hear that, they'd be like, these two guys are terrible, right? Instead of listening to everything what we're saying and trying to come to some sort of conclusion and figure out what is the right answer. Because my main thing here, I'm not upset that there's a transgender who wants to be on a swim team. That's great. I'm upset that there's in these certain situations when this happens, that there's someone who's not a transgender, who is as they were born, and has worked very hard and has a passion for something, and has the ability to stand out and do great things in the sport. And
they're coming in third place.
They're coming in third or worse, because there's this person with what I deem to be a physical advantage being let. And if it's not a physical advantage, they wouldn't always win.
So what's the answer? How do we...
Well, I mean, I think I have the answer.
Did you come across in your research at all? I'm curious, like, how big of a problem is this? How many trans athletes are there in the collegiate Division I sports, for example? I mean, do we know or have any sense of?
I don't think there's many, and I didn't look for statistics on that. And I think mainly some of the main ones that make the news are because they're standing out, because this is still a pretty new thing. People transitioning anyway. I mean, that's a new thing, meaning in the news and in sports.
Yep.
Because there were, in years past, if someone was transitioning or wanted to do that, like let's say in 1990, and they'd be like, well, I want to be on the girls' swim team. They'd be like, get out of here, and they just go back to practice, and they would exclude that person. It's almost like, let's let them get in here and dominate, because right now we can't figure out anything else better.
Well, the reason I was asking that question is because one logical solution would be to have teams made up of all trans athletes.
No, well, I mean, here's the thing. And I think that makes sense. And here's what I'll say. You asked for an answer. I think you have to start somewhere with what you just said. So I'll give you an example from my experience coaching. The last year I coached in high school wrestling was the year that ended right before the COVID shutdown. So
2019?
2019. It was March 2019 was like the high school state tournament in Maryland was like March 3rd that year. And like we went to the tournament, and then like 2 days later, everything was shutting down. So that happened also to be the first year that it used to be before. It's a co-ed sport. I told you, right? If a girl really liked wrestling and wanted to wrestle, and then you would have to make the varsity squad. Yeah, so you'd have to be the best wrestler in your weight class on your team to wrestle in the varsity spot. And that's the people who get to go to the county tournament, the regional tournament, the state tournament. And so if a girl couldn't beat, then the girls just never were varsity.
Mm-hmm.
And someone finally said in Maryland, hey, let's do a girls tournament, regional and state. We're going to develop what weight classes they're going to be, because there's not as many girls wrestling clearly. So we don't need 14 weight classes. I think they came up with maybe 10.
Yeah.
Maybe they did 14. I'm not sure. And like I said, you have to start somewhere. What they did was they said, you have to enter your person, weigh them in, and then they have to go to the regional tournament. And the regional tournament for the West region in Maryland for 3A, 4A high schools was run in our high school. And so we did the first girls regional wrestling tournament that would get them to the first girls state wrestling tournament. And you might say, well, Steve, how many girls were there really? And what would it really mean to be a regional champion? Well, I can tell you, we had a girl on our team who is in the 200-pound weight class. Now, there's not that many 200-pound high school girls in general, right? And there's even fewer that want to wrestle.
Mm-hmm.
We happened to have one of them on our team. So she basically walked into the regional tournament, forfeited all the way, was in the finals, was the only one in weight class. They raised her hand. She's a regional champion.
Never wrestled?
Never wrestled anybody. Okay. Huh. And you might say, well, that sounds pretty. Yeah, it's not the same thing as the guy who had to wrestle 40 matches to get and be a regional champion during the season. It's not the same. I agree. But you have to start somewhere. When we went to the state tournament, she was on our team. There's the separate girls state tournament, because someone like her would never be able to hang with 200-pound high school
guys, right?
Guys, she'd get destroyed, right?
Yeah. How does this translate to, I mean, I understand having an all-girls wrestling team and having girls wrestle girls. How does that translate to the
and I'm going to explain. The girls still are on the boys wrestling team because there's not that many of them. They don't have their own team, but they have their own tournament.
Oh, I see. I got you.
Right? Because you need people to practice with. And this gets really dicey. It's my answer. It worked for Maryland, and it's giving girls an equal opportunity to wrestle and achieve sports success in wrestling. The bottom line is that's good for girls' sports. Now, if there's transgender, they might have to start small. And someone's like, well, let's have the transgender professional MMA league.
Mm-hmm.
So this is for transgenders. The only problem with this now, as I'm sure you'll understand, is you're going to have to be two different females transitioning to males and males transitioning to females. They can't be fighting each other because we're going to have the same terrible results, right? But it'll be the female beating the male half to death, right? If we do that. So there would have to be, and you're like, this is really dicey, Steve, but that's the only way it can be fair without taking opportunities from women and girls in sports. It's going to have to, and maybe it'll grow over time. Maybe it won't, because like, what are you going to do? There will be 3 people in the country that are transitioning males to females that are also high level. I don't think there'll be more than 5 ever, because the numbers show this is not like a normal thing.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, maybe that's exactly the reason why these governing bodies kind of allow it to persist, is because the obvious answer is to create groups for people who are transitioning, but there's just simply, you don't have the numbers to do that. Of course, the downside is there's really no way to make it fair.
Yeah, I agree. And making it what we're calling quote unquote fair and equitable for one very small group of people, while at the same time completely putting regular young females and women disadvantaged in their sports competition, it's almost like, well, we feel like this is the right thing to do. They're just going to have to live with it. Like, that's not a good enough answer for me.
So how about this? What if the rule was that if you're male and you transition to female, you still compete against other males? Would that person be at a disadvantage in that case due to the hormone therapy? Do you know the answer to that?
I mean, I don't know the answer to that, but I think they probably would be at a disadvantage eventually. Then again, it's their choice that they decide to do that. I mean, there's not always a solid answer. I think the only solid answer is for them to compete against one another. If I'm the father of a daughter who's highly competitive in a sport, my problem is that they're putting someone who was born a young man against my daughter in a sport, and all her hard work is for naught. I'm thinking about all the new sports and all the new competitions that come out. I was just thinking about CrossFit. Like, you see these CrossFit on TV and they have the world championships, and it's really sort of interesting to watch all the stuff these people can do in great shape and everything. But still, they have the women's world championship and the men's world championship. So, like, there's a reason. No one's saying, well, why don't we just have one for everybody? Because people like that's not fair. Because the men are much stronger.
Yeah. So it's funny because in that way, we've already acknowledged as a society that there are differences between men and women. And it's like when it comes to transgender athletes, there's a tendency to want to ignore that difference.
Yeah. And it's in the interests of being perfectly inclusive. Like, we've just got to stick to that no matter what. But we do the Special Olympics. You know, they're like, these are for wheelchair basketball Olympics. Mm-hmm. Guys who like to throw a ball in a hoop, but they're in a wheelchair. Well, clearly they can't play with people who can run. It's not the same. So why can't there just be like a United States Games for transgenders and get them to all, you know, it's going to be in Philadelphia this year, just like they do with Special Olympics. So we're going to have this and you have to enter. And if they're like, well, but I want my own thing at my own high school. Well, you know what? There's just not enough. And it's not going to be, they're not going to have the same opportunity. Maybe that's the answer. They're not going to have the same opportunities, the same amount of competition. But like Special Olympics, they can have competition and they will have their day in the sun with their sport. And I bet you if you did one national, you know, the national transgenders track and field event, like, people would show. So maybe that's the answer. But, you know, I can't imagine if I was a father and someone came and let's say she was in a sport like running or whatever it would be, and came in and was like the number one person and took over and just like broke all the school records. I can't imagine. I know I'd be upset.
Yeah, that's tough to swallow.
It's just not fair.
It's so hard to have a discussion about fairness when it comes to something like this, when you have student athletes who are really on the short end of the stick when it comes to these things. And maybe it's easy for some people to kind of shrug their shoulders and say, well, it's a handful of people across all these different like collegiate and professional competitions. It's just not worth, you know, coming up with some of these alternatives that like we've discussed. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's tricky. I
mean, I'm going to say this. I'll say they have to compete against other transgenders that are transitioning in the same direction. A. B, if you want to solve it, go like the Special Olympics route and do some maybe regional and then a national big event tournament, whether it's like an Olympics thing or track and field or different sports, and make that happen. And that's just how it's going to be, because as the number is small enough that it shows that there'll be lack of competition, then they're just going to have to do what it takes to get to that step to where they're meeting that competition and not take clear advantages like they're getting when they're competing with girls and women. As we've seen, it's a clear advantage. And if it wasn't, we'd have complaints about girls transitioning to males taking away opportunities.
Yeah.
That shows right there that the advantage before any therapy
is one way.
It's built-in advantage that they're coming with. So that's the answer. It's not fair. I don't want anyone to get hurt or lose any opportunities because of it. But of course, Ben, you know I'm not in charge.
No, we're not. We're just a couple of guys having a conversation.
That's right.
All right. Well, I appreciate the research that you did. There was a lot of interesting insight there. Hopefully you guys enjoyed listening to that. If you'd like to hear more balanced, subscribe, because Steve and I have some more interesting conversations planned, and we're going to continue to produce this series and get it out to you. And we really appreciate you listening. So again, I'm Ben.
And I'm Steve.
And we are balanced.